tucked away in an old wooden house surrounded by golden wheat fields in Fairhaven, Nebraska. Life for the Harper family felt as peaceful as the breeze that swept across their porch every evening. Anna Harper, a 28-year-old mum with her brown hair tied back in a messy bun, and her husband, James, a tall bridge engineer, shared the little home with their 3-month-old son, Ethan. And then there was Shadow, their black-coated German shepherd with sharp amber eyes that seemed to see right through you. Shadow had been with them since their wedding days, a loyal buddy who'd curl up by the fireplace or quietly follow them down the dusty red roads around town. When Ethan was born, Shadow took to him like it was his job, sprawling out beside the wooden crib, ears perked up whenever the baby stirred. But everything flipped one late fall night when the first rain of the season poured down on Fairhaven, tapping steadily on the roof and fogging up the windows. Anna snapped awake in the middle of the night, not from the rain, but from a low rumbling growl coming from Ethan's room just down the hall. She bolted out of bed, her thin cotton pajamas sticking to her with cold sweat, and stumbled through the dark hallway, guided only by the faint glow of an old nightlight. When she pushed open Ethan's door, her heart stopped. Shadow stood frozen by the crib, eyes glinting in the dark, staring straight at Ethan as he slept. That growl rolled out of his throat, not loud, but tight, like a warning you couldn't ignore. Anna froze, her breath caught in her chest. Ethan, with his rosy cheeks and soft curls, slept on, oblivious in his little dream world. "Shadow, stop it," Anna whispered, her voice shaky. She stepped forward, resting a hand on his neck, feeling how stiff he was under that thick fur. He didn't fight her, but as she tugged him out of the room, his eyes stayed locked on Ethan, like he was being dragged away from something unfinished. She shut the door, heart racing, and shuffled back to the bedroom where James was snoring softly on their creaky double bed. She shook him awake, her voice cracking as she spilled it all out. James' Shadow was growling at Ethan. "I don't get it, what's going on? He's never done this." James sat up, rubbing sleepy eyes, and patted her head to calm her down. Maybe he just heard the rain, or a squirrel on the roof. "You know Shadow loves Ethan. I'll check it out in the morning." He sounded sure, but Anna's gut churned. Shadow wasn't the jumpy type. He'd stayed cool when a storm ripped the chicken coop apart, kept watch quietly while James tinkered with the car late at night. Something about that growl sent a chill down her spine, a weird feeling she couldn't name. Next morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the blazing red maple trees outside, Anna went to get Ethan up. Shadow was back by the crib, ears down like nothing had happened. But when she scooped Ethan into her arms, something odd caught her eye. Shadow lifted his head, staring at her with those deep eyes, and let out a soft whine, not a growl, but almost like he was begging. She stroked his head, telling herself it was just a one-off weird night. But deep down, she knew something had started. Mystery, their little house, and Shadow, held tight. The days after that rainy night, Shadow's growling didn't fade like Anna had hoped. It dug itself into their old wooden house, steady as the ticking wall clock in the living room. Every night, around 2 a.m., when Fairhaven was swallowed by darkness and the wheat fields went silent, Shadow would get up from his rug by the fireplace, pad quietly down the hall, and stop by Ethan's crib. That low growl would hum out, not loud, but sharp enough to slice through Anna's thin sleep. She stopped sleeping right, dark circles creeping under her eyes in the weak morning light. Every time she rushed to Ethan's room, it was the same. Shadow standing there, amber eyes blazing, staring at the sleeping baby like he was facing some invisible enemy. James, the practical guy raised on fields and machinery, tried to stay chill at first. "Maybe he's picking up a noise from the pipes or wind sneaking through the walls," he said, though his tone betrayed a flicker of doubt. But by the second week of non-stop growling, his patience started cracking. One night, when Anna yanked him awake in a panic, he decided to test it. He grabbed a pillow and blanket, camping out on Ethan's floor right by the crib. Shadow still showed up, right on time like a living alarm clock, growling even with James there, his hand on the dog's back trying to hush him. "Hey, easy, Shadow," he murmured, but Shadow kept at it, ears up, body taut as a wire. James sat up, watching Ethan sleep peacefully, wondering if he was missing something big. Next morning, as sunlight slipped through the faded floral curtains, Anna stepped into Ethan's room to change his diaper. She smiled down at his clear blue eyes, but that smile died when she spotted a small red scratch on his chubby arm. It wasn't deep, just a faint line, but it stopped her heart for a beat. "James," she yelled, voice breaking. James burst in, shirt still sloppy from sleep, and checked the scratch, frowning. "Maybe he did it in his sleep," he said, but his eyes slid to Shadow, lying quiet in the corner. Anna hugged Ethan tighter, tears welling up. What if it was Shadow? What if he hurt our baby? Her voice shattered, fear and pain mixing together. Shadow lifted his head, locking eyes with her, and let out a soft whine, not a growl, but like he was saying, no. That night, tension exploded under the kitchen's dim yellow light. Anna sat at the wooden table, clutching a cold coffee mug, while James leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I don't want to think the worst of Shadow," Anna said, her voice trembling, "but that scratch, and the growling every night. I'm scared, James, scared for Ethan." James sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I know Shadow means a lot to you, Anna. To me too. But what if he's losing it? What if he's jealous of Ethan? We can't take that chance." He suggested a full vet check, hoping for answers, maybe a sickness, maybe something mental. Anna nodded, her heart sinking. Shadow wasn't just a pet. He'd been her rock through lonely nights when James worked late, their silent guard. But now, she wasn't sure anymore. The next day, they drove down the bumpy red dirt road into town, Shadow sitting still in the back, staring out the window like he knew things were shifting. The vet, an older guy with thick glasses, checked Shadow top to bottom. Heart, lungs, ears, eyes, all perfect. "He's a healthy dog," he said, patting Shadow's head. "Could be stress, or maybe he's hearing something you folks don't. Take him home and keep an eye on him." On the drive back, Anna stayed quiet, gripping Shadow's leash, while James muttered, "If it's not his health, then what?" That night, the growling started again, a reminder that the mystery wasn't solved. And the unease in their little house amid the wheat fields just kept growing. After the vet trip, the air in the Harpers' wooden house turned heavy, like the grey sky blanketing Fairhaven before a winter storm. Shadow's growling didn't let up if anything. It felt more stubborn, like he was trying to tell them something Anna and James couldn't grasp. Anna started spending hours in the living room, the old table lamp casting light on her pale face as she clutched her phone, digging for answers. She read about dogs sniffing out sickness, sensing danger, even wild tales of animals talking to the unseen. Her mind spun between logic and crazy theories, but every night, when Shadow stood by Ethan's crib and let out that low rumble, a fresh wave of fear crept up on her. James, determined to figure it out, turned to tech. He ordered a little security camera from the hardware store in town, the kind that works in the dark and records sound. "If Shadow's reacting to something, we'll catch it," he told Anna, his voice firm but his eyes showing how desperate he was. That night, under a faint moon peeking through frosty windows, he set the camera up on the wall across from Ethan's crib. They sat in their bedroom, staring at the phone screen hooked to it. Right at 2 a.m., Shadow came in. He walked slow but steady, stopped by the crib, ears up, eyes sharp, and started growling quiet, but enough to make Anna shiver. They watched hard, but nothing else showed up. Ethan slept sound, curtains didn't budge, no weird noises. When the clip ended, James sighed, tossing the phone on the bed. "Nothing, Anna. Just Shadow and that freaky stare." Anna wouldn't give up though. She started wondering about stuff beyond what they could see. One afternoon, while James was at work, she rummaged through old books in the basement, stuff her aunt left behind when they moved in 5 years ago. She found a worn leather journal, handwritten with faded ink. It told of a farmer who lived there in the early 1900s, swearing his dog warned him of a flood by barking like mad every night. "Animals see what we don't," he'd written. Anna snapped it shut, her heart pounding. Could Shadow be picking up on some danger in the air, the walls, maybe the house itself? Next morning, she called a dog trainer in Lincoln, 2 hours away. "Carl, A guy with a deep, warm voice agreed to come check things out. When he got there, dressed in work clothes and muddy boots, he zeroed in on Shadow right away. He sat on the floor, locking eyes with the dog, letting Shadow sniff his hand. After an hour watching him, Carl stood, brow furrowed. "This dog's not crazy or jealous," he said. "He's warning you. Could be a gas leak, a sound we can't hear, something in the kids' room. You should get experts to look deeper." James nodded, though he wasn't sold. He didn't buy gut feelings, but Shadow's stubbornness made him They hired a crew from Omaha that weekend. Guys in blue uniforms showed up with gas detectors, sound gear, and fancy tools. They checked every inch chimney, pipes, even the insulation under the floor. 3 hours later, their boss, a silver-haired guy named Mike, shook his head. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "Air's clean, no odd sounds. Your house is fine." Anna looked at James, tears slipping down her face. "Then why's Shadow still doing it? What do we do now?" James didn't answer, just squeezed her hand, but his eyes wavered. That night, when the growling echoed again, Anna didn't rush to Ethan's room. She curled up in the armchair, hugging her knees, listening to it bounce down the hall like a constant nudge. What was Shadow trying to say? And if they didn't get it, would they lose the most precious thing in their lives? After the experts left, the Harpers' wooden house sank into a thick, stifling quiet, broken only by Shadow's relentless nightly growls. Anna and James faced a dead end. They couldn't keep living scared, but letting go of the dog who'd been family felt impossible. James, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, finally made the call he'd been dodging. "We've got to let Shadow go," he said one frigid morning, their breath fogging up the kitchen air. Anna stared at him, tears streaking her cheeks, but she didn't fight it. She knew he was right, they had no other way to keep Ethan safe. The shelter in Lincoln said they'd take Shadow tomorrow, and both tried not to meet those deep eyes as he lay by the fireplace, like he sensed what was coming. Fate didn't give them a chance to brace for it. That night, a wild winter storm slammed into Fairhaven, fiercer than anything the old radio had warned about. Wind screamed through the maple trees, rattling windows, while thunder roared like it had split the sky. The power flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Anna was in bed, trying to force sleep, when a new sound cut through the storm. Shadow's frantic barking, not growls, but big, desperate howls. She shot up, heart hammering, and ran out. James, already awake, followed, clutching an old flashlight that threw a shaky beam. When they hit Ethan's room, Anna screamed. Shadow wasn't still like usual, he charged at her, grabbing her cotton sleeve in his teeth and yanking her toward the crib with a strength she'd never felt from him. "Shadow, let go," she yelled, but he wouldn't. He dragged her right up to it, then leaped, front paws on the crib's edge, and jammed his nose hard into Ethan's chest. In the flashlight's flickering glow, James held up. Anna saw the worst thing imaginable. Ethan wasn't moving, his tiny lips blue, chest still. "No, Ethan," she shrieked, scooping him out of the crib. James froze, the flashlight clattering to the floor, its light twisting shadows on the walls. Anna held Ethan, tears pouring, her shaky hand on his chest. No breath, no life. She screamed James's name, but before he could move, Shadow took over. He let out a roar, wild, like it tore through the dark, and shoved his nose into Ethan's chest again, harder. Then, a tiny cough. Ethan jerked, sucked in a big breath, and wailed, his cry ringing over the storm outside. Anna clutched him tight, sobbing, while James dropped to his knees, hands on his head, stunned. Shadow sat back, panting, amber eyes watching them like he'd just finished a weeks-long mission. At dawn's first light, as the storm clouds broke apart, they rushed Ethan to Fairhaven's little hospital. Dr. Harris, a wiry guy with round glasses, checked him over carefully. After a tense hour, he came out, face serious. "He's got severe sleep apnea," he said. "He can stop breathing for minutes while he sleeps. If no one wakes him, you could have lost him." Anna grabbed James's hand, tears falling again. "Shadow," she whispered. "Shadow saved our boy." The doc frowned, but when James told the story, he nodded slow. I've heard of dogs catching stuff like that. Maybe he felt the kid's breathing change. You're damn lucky. On the ride home, no one spoke. Shadow sat in the back, head against the window, fur soaked from the storm. When they got inside, Anna knelt and hugged him, tears soaking into his thick black coat. Thank you, she whispered. James stood behind, hand on her shoulder, eyes full of regret for ever doubting their faithful friend. After that fateful night, the Harpers' old wooden house shed its cloak of fear and doubt. Winter's pale light gave way to early spring, when green shoots poked up through the wheat fields under a clear sky. Anna and James sat in the living room, watching Ethan play on the worn rug, his blue eyes sparkling with every giggle. Shadow stretched out beside him, head on his paws, ears down like he was resting after a long fight. But Anna and James knew better. Shadow never really rested. He was still their quiet soldier, guarding the boy he'd saved. They watched the camera footage from that night again, not to dig for proof, but to wrap their heads around the miracle. In the screen's hazy glow, Shadow stood by the crib, growling steady, eyes glued to Ethan every second. When the growls turned to wild barks, he bolted for Anna, dragged her over, and nudged Ethan awake. James paused it, hands shaky. We almost lost him, he said, voice thick. Anna nodded, tears slipping out. And we almost lost Shadow. They hugged, then turned to the dog, who lifted his head with a calm stare. Anna knelt, running her fingers through his thick black fur, whispering, You're our angel, you know that. Next day, James drove into town for something special. He came back with a new collar for Shadow, not the cheap leather they'd used before, but real dark brown leather with a little metal tag engraved, Guardian of the Dark. Anna smiled as James slipped it on, and Shadow wagged his tail a bit, like he got what it meant. You earned it, James said, his voice soft for the first time in weeks, not tight with stress. They didn't stop there. After Dr. Harris's tip, they got Ethan a breathing monitor. Tiny gadget clipped to his chest that beeped if his breathing paused too long. The first night with it, the alarm went off at 2 a.m., proving what they'd guessed. Ethan's sleep apnea was a real threat. But Shadow didn't growl anymore. He just lay by the crib, eyes half closed, like he trusted they were safe now. Anna stood at the doorway, watching, and felt a peace she'd lost ages ago. Time passed, and Shadow's story spread through Fairhaven. Neighbors, used to seeing the German Shepherd stroll with Anna down the red dirt roads, started dropping by with pies or toys for Ethan. One afternoon, Carl, the trainer from Lincoln, came back to check on Shadow. He sat on the floor, petting him, and laughed big. Told you he wasn't nuts. Smarter than us even. Anna spilled the whole tale, and Carl nodded, eyes impressed. Shadow's one of those rare ones. He doesn't just stick by you, he lives for you. That spring, as wildflowers popped up around the house, Anna sat on the porch with Ethan dozing in her arms while James fixed the wooden fence a few yards off. Shadow lay beside her, head on the step, amber eyes quietly scanning the endless fields. She leaned down, whispering, Thanks for not giving up. Shadow winced softly, like he was answering back. She looked up at the fiery sunset on the horizon. Knowing this house, old and simple as it was, would always be their shelter, all because of a silent hero with a black coat. The story ends there. Shadow next to Ethan, a little bigger now, in that small room under the nightlight's soft glow. Spring wind slipped through the window crack, but it didn't carry fear anymore. Just peace, and a collar with words that told of loyalty beyond time. If you find the story interesting and meaningful, please click follow and like to support me to create more stories. Thank you.